Hello, and welcome to my Inspirational Ingrid channel. I hope you're all well. And we are back with another one of my episodes. As you know, I'm doing a walk through the Bible for all these women in the Bible. And I've done quite a few episodes. I'm now on episode 10, which is actually called Let's Talk About Miriam. Let's talk about Miriam. Okay, so before I forget, please like and share and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, because this really helps me out. So as I was saying, these episodes that I've been doing for the past couple of weeks, I'm now on week 10. So as you know, I've been doing it for a while. So let's just have a look at some of the women that I've been talking about in the Bible. I started with Eve, then Sarah, then Hagar, then Rebecca, then Rachel, then Leah, then Dinah, then Tamar, and last week I did one on Zipporah. So today we are talking about Miriam. And Miriam was actually mentioned last week in the episode of Zipporah. So in the Bible, Miriam is actually mentioned in Exodus 2, Exodus 15, and Numbers 12, and finally, Numbers 20. Okay, so we're just going to give you kind of a brief overlook of who Miriam is. So Miriam is actually a Levi. She comes from the tribe of Levi, okay? And so her eldest brothers, not her eldest brother, she's actually the eldest sister, to her brother Aaron, who's actually a prophet, and also to Moses. And as you know, many of you, I spoke about Moses as well, because, Zipporah last week was actually married to Moses. And this is why Miriam was mentioned. But let's just go to the backstory of Miriam. So like I said, Miriam was actually in Exodus 2. So if I read verses 1, okay, going all the way down, I think it goes down to about, let's have a look. What do I read down? Yeah. So it's Exodus chapter 2 and it's verses 1 to 10. And this talks about how Miriam, as a Levi, coming from the Levi because she's an Israelite, this talks about how Miriam was thinking very quickly as a young girl, very, very quickly, and actually saved her brother's Moses' life. Because in those days, Israelite women were not allowed to have the children. If the children were born, they were killed. And so Moses really should have been killed, but his mother saved him. So let's just read a little bit of the backstory in Exodus 2. Okay, verses 1 to 10. And it says, now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she couldn't hide him any longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister, which is Miriam, stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister, which is Miriam, asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the Miriam went and got the baby's mother, which is Moses' mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman, Moses' mother, took the baby and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she took him back to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So this is where the story of Miriam actually began. Because basically she was Moses' sister. But she thought very quickly out of the box by saying to Pharaoh's daughter, would you like me to get a Hebrew woman to nurse him? To basically feed him, breastfeed him. With Pharaoh's daughter just agreeing to what this young girl said, she just said, yes, of course. Not knowing that the woman that was actually going to nurse Moses was in fact his mother, his own mother. So Moses wasn't killed. Moses was saved by not only his mother, who sent him down the River Nile, but also his sister Miriam, who brought him back into the family household until he was old enough to go into the palace with Pharaoh's daughter, and she could call him her own. So this is just so amazing. This is who Miriam is as a young girl. Remember, she's not even turned into a woman yet. She's a young girl. And she helped save her brother's life, brought Moses back into the family household where he could be with his mother, probably his father, and his own brother Aaron as well. That is when Moses moved back into the palace and lived as an Egyptian. So he did actually grow up as a Hebrew child, as an Israelite child for a while. Sometimes the act of God is just so amazing. But isn't it great how he chose Miriam in this story? Okay, so this is Exodus 2. So the story goes on after a while, obviously, when Moses actually grows up, and then goes to save the Israelites, lead them out of Egypt. But Miriam is around. Miriam is there, and Miriam is with her brother Aaron. Now, Aaron becomes the prophet, as you know, because the Levi tribe are priests. The Levi tribes are actually priests. So Aaron is a priest, but so is Miriam. Miriam is actually a prophetess. Miriam, along the lineage of the Levi tribe, she becomes a prophetess. And so when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and the Egyptians were coming after them, and chasing them, remember, they hit the Red Sea. They hit the Red Sea and they couldn't cross. And this is when God parted the Red Sea. So the Israelites walked on dry ground. Walked on dry ground across the Red Sea. This is the most miraculous miracle there is. And that's why Moses is such a big character. But we're talking about Miriam. We're talking about Miriam today. We know Moses is great. But Miriam is Moses' sister. So what happens is when all the Israelites cross over, just right at the end, the Egyptians are starting to chase them now. So the Israelites are going to have to run onto dry ground and come out of the ocean, because the sea walls are on either side. They're actually held up on either side. But here comes the Egyptians and their chariots and their horses, and they're chasing after the Israelites. So what God does, as soon as the last Israelite person lands on dry ground on safety, God closes up the walls of the sea, the Red Sea, over the Egyptians, over their chariots and over their horses. So basically the Egyptians drown. The Egyptians drown. So if we go on to, where are we going now? If we go on to Exodus 15, Exodus 15, there is a song of Moses and also a song of Miriam. Now, I'm not really going to do the song of Moses. I'm only going to do the song of Miriam because it was Miriam that we're actually talking about. So if we go to Exodus 15 and it's verses 19, verses 19 to 21. And this is how it goes. It says, when Pharaoh's horses, chariots and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel. Here's mine. Took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." Yes, the song of Miriam. I love it. I love it. I absolutely love it. So this is who Miriam is. She was never really behind the scene. She was very active. She played a very active role. It's just that sometimes we forget about these women and what they do. We forget about the women. But Miriam's song is known so much, around the world, especially to the Jewish nation, because she is praising, she is singing, and she is dancing. People forget that you can sing and dance for the Lord. This is praise and worship. And this is what Miriam did. It was an act of worship, praising the Lord, telling everyone that he is highly exalted and highly to be praised. I'm not being funny, but Miriam really does get me excited. She really does get me excited because you don't really hear much about her. We all knew about this young girl, who was by the River Nile watching her brother Moses go down into the basket and rescuing him. We know about that young girl. But what about when she gets older? She's a prophetess. She is a prophetess. She speaks to the people. She is a born leader, like her brother Aaron. She prays. She encourages. She preaches. She prophesies to say what God will do. So when we think about Moses by himself, remember it was Moses and Aaron that went to Pharaoh. Obviously, Miriam didn't go. So Miriam is probably one of the young women that stayed behind to encourage the people, to encourage the Israelites. While all these things are going on, she was probably prophesying, saying, we will be free. We will leave Egypt. We will leave the Egyptians and we will see them no more. You can imagine the things that she was actually saying. And that's why the story of Miriam is so beautiful and so wonderful. Yes, she sang and she danced and she praised. What a beautiful woman. What a beautiful woman. Highly to be exalted and highly to be praised. This is what she did. So, it was known that Miriam was a prophet, okay? And because she was a prophetess, the Bible tells us, or various Bibles tell us, that she prophesied to her mother that Moses would be saved. She prophesied to her mother that her mum would give birth to a baby boy who would free the Israelites. So from a very young age, this young girl who turned into a beautiful young woman was prophesying from a very young age. And this is why it's so important to listen to young children today. When you hear the prayers of a child, it is so emotional. They're so pure and so innocent. And they speak to their Father in heaven and tell him exactly what they want and how they need his help. This is what they do. To this young Miriam, she was already encouraging her family, her mother, her father, her brothers probably, her cousins, all the people around her in the village, in the town. This is who she was. What a beautiful woman. And so, unfortunately, Miriam's name doesn't actually go with who she is, because her name means bitter. Yeah, Miriam's name actually means bitter, which is very strange in the Hebrew language, knowing that what she didn't seem to be bitter at all. In actual fact, she was bittersweet. She was sweet, wasn't she? She was very sweet. And so this is just one of the things that, a lot of the Jewish nation talk about, because don't forget they have different books as well. And so they love Miriam. They absolutely adore the story of Miriam and what she did and how she sang and how she praised and how she prophesied. So this is really good. And so, after saving Moses' life, after them being led out of Egypt and crossing the Red Sea, like I said, Miriam, as a prophetess, taught people faith. She taught people faith. She taught people faith and how to encourage them in the darkest of time. Because remember, they were slaves. They were slaves in Egypt. So this is what she was doing. Okay, she was actually doing that. So there's only one bad thing, which I actually spoke about last week when I was talking about Zipporah. There's only one bad thing that I can say that maybe Miriam is bitter, is when she spoke badly of Moses's Cushite wife. So if you saw my video last week in episode 9, Zipporah was Moses's wife. But we don't know, because she was a Midianite. Later on in Numbers, it actually said she was a Cushite. But we don't know if that was Zipporah or Moses has married another wife, another Cushite wife. But all we know is that this Cushite wife was dark. She was very dark, had a very dark complexion. And, Aaron and Miriam, the prophet and the prophetess, told Moses off for being with this Cushite wife, because remember, they weren't supposed to marry out of their culture, out of an Israelite. They were supposed to choose an Israelite wife. This is what the men were supposed to do. And the women were also meant to have an Israelite husband. But in fact, Moses chose a Cushite wife, whether it was Zipporah or not, but he chose a Cushite wife, and they did not like it. They made a lot of noise. Miriam and Aaron made a lot of noise. But because Miriam made the noise, God called Miriam, Aaron, and Moses together, and he spoke to them all, and he said, I have called Moses. I speak to Moses face to face. Moses is the one that led the children out of Egypt. Yeah, my children out of Egypt. How dare you insult his Cushite wife? This is what God was saying. How dare you insult Moses' wife? That's who Moses chose, and that's who I've also chosen for Moses. I have agreed this marriage. I have acknowledged this marriage. I have anointed this marriage, and I have blessed this marriage. This is what God is actually saying to both Miriam and Aaron. And because of this, Miriam was actually struck with leprosy. Her skin turned totally white. You know what leprosy looks like. It looks awful. And if you're an Israelite, as you know, this is unclean. If you become a leper, you are now unclean. So she's actually banished out of the village where she is without her people. She has to go into isolation now, because remember, she doesn't look pretty. She's unclean and no one can be near her. So she's banished out, right? No one can be near her. She has to be by herself. This is God teaching Miriam a lesson here. And so Moses felt so sorry for Miriam, because Moses loved Miriam. Because don't forget, Miriam helped save his life when he was a baby. So he absolutely adored her. And he prayed to God. He said, God, my Father, please heal her. Please heal my sister Miriam. You know, God with all his mercy and compassion. You know how much love he has for his children. And you know how much love he had for Moses. So he honored Moses' request. That's why I say prayer works. Prayer is powerful. You know, whatever you ask God and he grants it, that is a blessing. So God granted Moses's request, but she was still to be banished for 7 days. Yeah. And this was to teach her a lesson. She was not allowed to come back to everyone for 7 days, but God healed her after the 7 days. So what did Miriam do in those 7 days? She probably repented to God. She probably pleaded with him and asked for forgiveness and mercy. But he did. He had compassion on Miriam. I told you, God loves his children so much, but he loves his daughters too. Even when they do wrong, he still forgives his daughters and he gives them another chance. God is a God of second chances. He doesn't just throw you away. He might just let you sort of like, dwell in things a little bit sometimes. But the majority of the time, he forgives you. He gives you another chance. And it's up to you now how you're going to walk the walk with him the next time round. But this is Miriam's story. Like I said, this is Miriam's story. Okay? So maybe it is actually a bit of a bittersweet story, isn't it? Now you can actually see why she was probably called bitter in the other side. Don't forget, we always have there's always two sides of us, isn't there? Really. Do you know what I mean? So, like I said, this was one of the cases here. And that was I think that was in Numbers. Where did I see that one? I think that was in Numbers 12. Numbers 12. Yeah, that was in Numbers 12. So, let's just carry on a little bit. So, again, who was Miriam? Miriam was actually married. Even though she was a prophetess, she was actually married. And it says she was actually married to a man. And he was called Caleb. This is the story that we have. She was actually married to Caleb. And so I think what happened here, let's just have a look at another one. Oh, yes. So Caleb, her husband, these stories are so funny. I forgot all about this bit. Do you remember I've been talking about all these women in the Bible and how many of them have been abandoned by their husbands? Even Moses abandoned Zipporah, do you remember? So that he could go to Egypt. And we discussed that in plenty. But here's Miriam now, the prophetess, the sister of Moses and Aaron, and her husband Caleb also, also abandons her. Also, it's quite funny. And so it's just like one of those stories. And that's why it's probably the time, obviously, when she was being isolated. She was isolated. And don't forget, a lot of people said she was beautiful but plain. Plain Jane, I don't know. But Caleb loved Miriam. He saw that she was beautiful inside and out because he saw her spiritual beauty. So whatever deficiencies she might have had, he saw something in Miriam that no one else saw. But yeah. So, I don't think it was the fact that she was abandoned by him so much. It was probably when she was actually banished from the village. That was probably the abandonment, really. But like I said, Caleb is the one that actually loved her. And so, her story is not actually a bad story. But anyway, time passes by. Okay, time passes by, and obviously, you know, times have moved on. And the sad story is she dies. Obviously, she dies. And this is actually in Numbers 20, I think. Numbers 20, she dies. It says something like, you know, when all the congregation and the children of Israel had arrived at the desert in Zin, okay, this is where Miriam died, and she was actually buried there. She was actually buried there. Yeah. And because she was actually buried there, the funny thing was the Israelites no longer had water. The time that Miriam was buried, this is what they say. There was a lack of water. The water had dried up. So it's almost like her life with the Israelites was kind of like a blessing. It's like, let me just explain it to you like this. When my grandmother and my mother-in-law and my mother passed away, it felt like there was blessings that they had. And when they'd gone, their blessings had parted. This is how it felt in my own life. And so now, Inspirational Ingrid has to now pray on her own. And she now has to build up her own faith. But this is kind of what happened to the Israelites. Because Miriam had passed on now. And the Israelites never lacked water. From their journey that they had, remember, food actually dried up because they had to have manna and quails. God poured down manna, which is like bread, and quails, which is birds, you know, like meat. And he poured it down from heaven so the Israelites had food every day. But they also had water as well. But the time that Miriam dies, this is in like Jewish tradition and their history, it is stated that there was a lack of water. No more was there any water for the Israelites to drink. And they became thirsty, and they complained to Moses and Aaron that they had no water to drink. So they said it was because Miriam had died that the water had dried up. This is what the Israelites were actually saying. So the prophetess died. So what was the blessing with her? Was the blessing water? Did she have a prophecy of water with her? It's very strange, isn't it, to know that this woman was with all the Israelites this time and they weren't once thirsty until she passed away. So what does this tell you about this woman? What is the significance of the prophetess Miriam? What is her role? Her role was to encourage. Her role was to bless. Her role was to prophesy. Her role was to sing. Her role was to dance. Her role was to praise. And her role was to play her timbrels. But also the water. The water. Wherever Miriam went, they had water. This is so interesting because I'd never seen this before. So this to me has actually been something that's been highlighted in her story. And like I said, from episode 1 all the way down to now episode 10, all these women that I've been speaking about have played such a major role, such an important role. Because don't forget, if Miriam didn't save Moses' life, there would have been no Moses. If there was no Moses, would the Israelites have been freed from Egypt? Would the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea? You see, God plays such an important role in our life. Remember that we have been thought of before we were in our mother's wombs. So God knows the role that we're going to play. So sometimes if we don't follow the exact role that we're supposed to play, what's supposed to happen is actually delayed. Because it is us who's actually meant to carry out something. We, as God's children, each have something important that we need to do on this earth, each one of us. And Miriam's story was to save her brother Moses so that he could free the Israelites. And her role was also to prophesy over the people and encourage them. And her role also could have been the blessing of water. The blessing of water. Because where the Israelites walked with Miriam, they had water. They had water until she died. So, my people, I don't know what role you play. Yeah, I don't know what role you play. But all I know is don't count yourself out. When people have counted you out, do not count yourself out. Because you don't know, how important you are. You don't know how important you are to God. And you don't know how important you are on this earth. Because you don't know what role it is that you specifically have to carry out. Amen. Now, I hope you've actually enjoyed this one, because I really have. And it's funny because I speak about these women. It's only when I'm actually doing the whole talk that I actually get the blessing too. So like I said, I hope it's blessed you, this story. And please, beg you, go back and watch some of my other videos as well. And just see if any of these women reflect your life. Just see if any of them reflect your life at all. I mean, I don't even know if Miriam had any children. I didn't actually see that. And I didn't actually find that out. So maybe she was one of those women that just didn't. Because her work was so important. She didn't have time. There was so much for her to do. She was a busy woman. And that wasn't her calling. Because remember, all the other women I've been talking about, they've all had children. But maybe Miriam was not supposed to. And it wasn't because God didn't want to bless her. It's because that her role was so much different. And sometimes women, it's not the case that you should have children. And if you don't have children, you're not blessed. Sometimes you are more blessed because you don't have children, because of the role that you have to carry out for the Lord. Amen. So like I said, you are a child of God. You are special. You are unique, and you are chosen, and you are very much loved by your Father in heaven. So may God continue to lead, guide, and protect you. May God bless you and just make his face just to shine upon you and give you perfect peace. Amen. So until next time, family, stay safe out there. And please tune in, like, share, and subscribe to my channel, because this helps me out. The more my channel grows is the more that I can bring these wonderful videos to you. So tune in again next week for another walk in the Bible with another woman. Stay blessed. Bye for now. Bye.